Mr. Moyo wasn't just arrogant, he was cruel in ways that left scars, deeper than words could express. Months would pass without us receiving our salaries, yet he would show up in a new car or boast about the luxurious vacations he and his families were planning. The money will come, he'd say with that sly smile, acting as if we didn't have children to feed or rent to pay. When anyone dared to complain, he'd laugh and say, "If you don't like it, leave. There's always someone else willing to take your place." The truth was, many of us couldn't afford to leave. We were trapped, and he knew it. What made it worse was his son, a young man with too much time on his hands and no real skills. Mr. Moyo sent him to the office to observe operations, but we all knew what he was really doing, spying. He'd watch us like a hawk, reporting back to his father about who was complaining or slacking. Once, one of the senior staff members confronted the boy after overhearing him mock a cleaner for her torn shoes. That man was fired the very next day, no explanation given. Mr. Moyo's cruelty seemed to run in the family. His son, always lurking in the office pretending to help, treated people even worse. One afternoon, I overheard him shouting at his father's longtime driver. "You're just a driver. Why do you even speak to me?" He sneered, throwing a set of car keys at the man's feet like he was some servant. The driver, an older gentleman with years of loyalty to the family, didn't say a word, but the pain on his face was obvious. That moment stayed with me because it showed how deep the arrogance and disrespect ran in that family. No one was spared their venom, no matter how undeserving. We learned to keep our heads down and our frustration silent, but the tension in the air was suffocating. For the women, it was even worse. Mr. Moyo had a habit of calling female staff into his office late in the evening, especially when payday was near. If they asked about their salaries, he'd grin and say something disgusting like, "We can work something out, can't we?" A few women left the office in tears after those meetings, and others quit entirely, but no one ever spoke about it directly. He was untouchable, or so he thought. One day, Mr. Moyo's wife came to the office, something she rarely did. She walked in quietly, her face kind but anxious, carrying a sense of dignity despite her nervous steps. Everyone paused to watch as she entered his office to speak on behalf of one of the pregnant staff members, who had been begging for her overdue salary for weeks. We all thought that, maybe because it was his wife, he'd listen this time. Instead, his voice boomed through the walls moments later, mocking her in front of the staff. "Don't come here meddling in my business," he shouted. "You think running a company is like running your little home?" A few minutes later, she walked out, humiliated, her head low as she quickly left the building. The next morning, the pregnant woman she had tried to help was fired without explanation, leaving us all stunned and terrified. We were all sitting in the small office that Friday afternoon, pretending to work. You know how it is, the week had drained us, and nobody wanted to upset Mr. Moyo. Our boss, the type who always reminded you that he built the company from nothing. "I don't pay you to breathe," he'd back if he caught anyone slacking. Then the scream came. It was loud, sharp, and strange, like it didn't belong in the office. For a second, nobody moved. Mr. Moyo stood in his glass office, staring out like he was trying to figure out what just happened. "What's going on out there?" he demanded. Before anyone could answer, Tobo from HR came running in. He looked pale, like he'd just seen a ghost. "Sir, there's something outside the gate," he stammered. "What something?" Mr. Moyo backed. "A woman," Tobo said, swallowing hard. She's not normal." We all got up, even though we knew Mr. Moyo hated us leaving our desks. When we got outside, we saw her. She stood barefoot by the gate, wrapped in a dusty red cloth. She was old, ancient even. Her hair was thin and gray, and her skin looked like cracked earth. She pointed a crooked finger straight at Mr. Moyo and said, "You have forgotten who you are." Mr. Moyo laughed. "Who let this madwoman in here?" "Security." But nobody moved. The guard stood frozen, staring at her like she was made of fire. She took a step closer. "You take, and you laugh at those who have nothing. You have no respect for the land, for the people, for the spirits. You're insane. Mr. Moyo shouted, but his voice cracked. Get out before I call the police. Then she said something that made my blood go cold. The land will take back what you stole. She bent down and scooped up a handful of dirt from the ground outside the gate. She held it up, whispering words in a language I didn't recognize, and then blew the dirt into the air. It scattered in the wind, disappearing almost instantly. I saw something in Mr. Moyo's eyes at that moment, fear. But just for a second. He waved his hand and went back inside, yelling about crazy people and wasted time. We all returned to our desks, but none of us could focus. The air felt heavy, like the woman's words were still hanging around. By the time we left for the day, she was gone, but the uneasy feeling stayed. She wasn't just there to confront him, she was there to deliver justice in the way only the old spirits can. Monday came, and Mr. Moyo didn't show up. By Wednesday, the rumors started. His housekeeper said he hadn't left his bedroom. Some said he was sick, others whispered that he was cursed. Then, on Friday, we got the call. Mr. Moyo was dead. The official report said a heart attack, but Tobo swore he saw something strange when he went to the house to pay respects. He said the floor around Mr. Moyo's bed was covered in dirt. Nobody talked about the old woman again after that. But every now and then, when the wind blows just right, I hear her voice. And when I do, I stop what I'm doing, close my eyes, and whisper, I remember.